Konnichiwa. In today's presentation, I'll be discussing two topics. The first being the role opposition parties play at the national level in Japan. I'll be discussing this in relation to a comment made by Honourable Alban Bagbin of Ghana, who claims that the role of the opposition is to provide a voice for the voiceless. I'll also be discussing this in that the role of the opposition is to prevent as much power for the ruling government to gain. I'll be highlighting how opposition parties project this role through the upper and lower houses, and also through delay tactics that have famously been used in the past. I will follow this up by analysing two cases where opposition parties have challenged the ruling government, which throughout most history has been the LDP. These cases are the HIV-tainted blood scandal of the 1980s and also history of opposition to amendments of Article 9. The second topic will be discussing how Japanese people articulate their interests within local level politics and whether they are disenfranchised or not. I'll bring to light methods of interest articulation such as protesting, lobbying, and even voting to argue that Japanese people are not disenfranchised. Let's begin. Firstly, the role of the opposition, in the words of Alban Bagbin, is to be a voice for the voiceless. They are also tasked with limiting the power of the ruling party, which throughout most of post-war Japan has been the LDP. The opposition can achieve this in a number of ways. If the ruling governments wish to pass through new legislation, they will have to pass it first through the House of Representatives, followed by the House of Councillors. A two-thirds majority is needed to pass through the proposed legislation in the House of Councillors before it can become law. This has been an easy task for the LDP until it was defeated in the House of Councillors in 1989. Ruling governments after this time had to create a two-thirds majority by bargaining with the opposition. Keep in mind, though, that the LDP still had a strong grip over the House of Representatives, where rejected legislation in the upper house could pass through again 30 days later and become law. So it's up to the opposition to capitalise on the required two-thirds majority to push through their own interests. The reason why governments simply cannot wait for legislation to go through the lower House of Representatives a second time is due to that they are pressured to get the legislative program finished within one parliamentary session, extensions included. This is where opposition parties utilise the poor parliamentary timetable through the use of delay tactics. As mentioned in the lecture pod, the JSP famously used the cow walk when casting their votes in 1960. In 2015, when two security bills which aimed to change Japan's pacifist stance were being bulldozed through the upper house, the Democratic Party of Japan resorted to different types of delay tactics. In response to public disapproval, the Democratic Party of Japan trapped the LDP chairman Yoshida Konoike and later mobbed him once he managed to escape. The bills were pushed through 22 hours after the original session was supposed to take place, and a no-confidence motion was submitted against the chairman due to a lack of mistrust by the Democratic Party. Whether opposition parties are doing this for their own political gain or for the people they represent, they still have an immense effect through these tactics, and it's an imperative that they continue to use them for the sake of those who cannot address the governments directly. Ruling governments can either listen to the demands of the opposition, or they can decide to push through legislation unilaterally. However, this is seen as breaking the consensus, or exercising the tyranny of the majority, which further reiterates the role of the voice of the voiceless. The winner-takes-all notion doesn't sit well with the Japanese, as they feel disenfranchised, which magnifies the opposition's role to question the government and its practices. In the 1980s, under LDP rule, hundreds of people would contract HIV due to the corrupt practices of the health ministry and also pharmaceutical companies who were looking to protect Japan's blood product industry. With HIV and AIDS appearing suddenly in the US in the 1980s, Atsuaki Ganji, under the request by the Ministry of Health, formed an AIDS virus program that would be led by Dr. Abe Takahashi. In 1983, the first death of a Japanese national with AIDS went unrecorded by Dr. Takahashi. The first recorded death wasn't until 1985, 2 years later, when a homosexual male would return to Japan from the US. Under the request from the ministry, Dr. Takahashi also did not publicize that 47 of his 183 hemophiliac patients contracted the disease. The way they contracted the disease was through the administration of non-heated blood packs that were tainted with the HIV strand. If injured, hemophiliacs are unable to stop bleeding naturally, thus they require blood packs to assist with blood clotting. During this time, blood plasma was purchased from the US to create these blood products. However, with the HIV virus spreading in the US, the packs were deemed unsafe to use, and the health ministry and pharmaceutical companies were advised to switch to heated packs, which would not contain the disease. However, the heater packs were in limited supply only from the US. Thus, the Health Ministry decided not to ban the creation and use of contaminated blood products until 1986, as they sought to protect the Japanese blood product industry. Atsuaki Ganji believed that the benefits of using contaminated products was well worth the risk, as HIV and AIDS was widely perceived as a homosexual disease. To make matters worse, the Green Cross Corporation, Midori Junji, continued to supply contaminated products until 1988, despite reporting to the ministry that they had all been withdrawn. As a result, approximately 1,800 people were infected with the disease by 1986. Lawsuits were made against the ministry, companies, and doctors involved. However, it wasn't until Naoto Kan became health minister in 1996 that any positive action was taken. Naoto Kan was born in the Yamaguchi Prefecture in 1946. While studying at Tokyo Institute of Technology, Kan would continuously grow tired of scandals involving the LDP. This, along with protest involvement, would lead him to studying a career within politics. After helping women's rights activist Fusai Ichikawa return to politics, Kan sought to join with like-minded politicians to play a bigger role within the Diet and to help bring down the LDP. However, after unsuccessful attempts, as party member of Saki Gakkai, Kan partnered himself with the LDP in 1996, in which he was awarded the role of health minister. As health minister, Kan immediately ordered his staff to produce all unpublicized files regarding the haemophiliacs in the blood scandal that were reportedly lost. When they were found, Kan admitted that his ministry was at fault for hundreds of people contracting the disease. What followed were several arrests, including the president of the Green Cross Corporation and Dr. Abe Takahashi. Naoto also decided to settle with each victim of the scandal outside of court, awarding them $450,000 each, while also ordering pharmaceutical companies involved to issue public apologies. Therefore, Naoto Kan provided a voice for the Japanese people at a political level, not only as opposition party member, but also taking the steps to join those he had notoriously been opposing his whole life, up until his promotion as health minister. He even went through with his actions knowing he and his ministers might have faced criticism. Kan would later join the Democratic Party of Japan and become Prime Minister in 2010 until his resignation in August 2011. Since the formation of the Japanese Constitution in 1947, amendments to the interpretation of Article 9 have been made to help enhance Japan's defense and military capabilities. However, there has been a history of strong protest by the Japanese people to this. As we saw in Lecture Pod 9.2, there was a strong public disapproval to the security bill Kishi Nobutsuke was attempting to push through the Diet, as many saw it as unconstitutional. Kishi was attempting to invite President Eisenhower to Japan in celebration for the passing of the bill. However, due to delay tactics used by the Japanese Socialist Party, public outcry, and the death of a female protester, the trip was cancelled as Eisenhower's safety couldn't be guaranteed. In 2015, the LDP made more changes to the interpretation of Article 9 to allow the use of collective defense. During the process of being passed through the Diet, the Democratic Party also resorted to delay tactics and mobbed the LDP chairman due to the public disapproval of these bills. A month later, the cabinet also approved of an increase in the defense budget, increasing it to $42 billion. We can see the recent public outcry to this in how the Student Emergency Action for Liberal Democracy organization staged a protest in reaction to the passing of the bills. We thus see a shared interest between the public and the opposition parties. The opposition, whether for their own political gain or that they truly support Japan's pacifist nature, assist in providing a voice for those without one. They project the views of the public within the Diet, which has tremendous effects on the ruling governments and the politicians. We saw this when Prime Minister Kishi was forced to resign a number of days later after successfully passing his security bill in 1960. Also, given the severity of the protests in the 1960s and also recently, the opposition isn't only making their role clear on a national level, but also on the international stage. I now move on to my second topic, where I will discuss how Japanese people articulate their interests within local level politics to argue that they are in fact not disenfranchised. Japan consists of 47 prefectures, ken, which are individually run by elected governors. Governments of these prefectures are tasked with monitoring and improving public works, such as urban development, roads and housing, as well as education and social welfare. They have a large expenditure base, as it is estimated that these 47 local governments account for 70% of the general government's expenditure in one fiscal year. If people become dissatisfied or have certain issues they feel local governments should be addressing, such as environmental problems and social issues, they are able to vocalize their opinions in a number of ways. The first of these are protesting and lobbying. As you saw before in the video, the Student Emergency Action for Liberal Democracy organisation waged a massive protest against the central government as they sought to amend the interpretation of Article 9. At the local level, people can form citizen groups to challenge the prefectural governments. One such case was in 2006 when a town assembly protested against the US military airfield that was being built in Ginowan, Okinawa. The leader of the town assembly commented that it is not a matter that should be decided by a handful of people in response to the mayor's endorsement of the airfield's construction. Actions like this may lead to people feeling disenfranchised, and they may resort to other forms of interest articulation, such as petitioning and contacting local politicians directly. However, the most important form of interest articulation, especially in Japan, is voting. While this may seem relatively straightforward, keep in mind that voting in Japan isn't mandatory like it is in Australia. Therefore, Japanese people vote out of need rather than requirement. If politicians continue to ignore the interests of local people and citizen groups, then they may find themselves being removed from government in the next election in favour of someone who will actually listen and work with the people. In 2014, voter turnout for the parliamentary elections estimated at around 53% of the voting age population, which equals to around 53 million people. It would be expected that local governments would experience similar, if not higher turnouts, given that people are more affected and involved in prefectural issues such as education and welfare. Thus, given the way Japanese people articulate their interests at the local level, it can be concluded that they are in fact not disenfranchised. With this, my presentation comes to a close. I hope you now have a better understanding of the role of the opposition and how they have been enforcing this throughout Japanese political history. As well as this, I hope certain methods of interest articulation have helped you realize that Japanese people are in fact not disenfranchised, but very much empowered. Thank you.